There is a way to tell the compiler that it should look at reference types as being non-nullable. It won't change the code that is generated, nor will it prevent you from using null. What this feature will do is help you find the places in the code where a potential null reference exception can occur. As of .NET 6, this is the default behavior, and nullable reference types are enabled by default. For new projects, this makes sense, as you'd very much like to avoid nulls and null reference exceptions as much as you can. Each project in a solution can have a configuration that indicates that nullable is enabled or disabled. This is known as configuring the nullable context. This can also be configured using the properties for the project by navigating to Build, General, and then scroll down until you find the section on Nullable. Here, you can see the different options for this configuration. We can, of course, enable or disable, but in addition to that, you can configure this to only produce compiler warnings or annotate your code in Visual Studio to indicate that you may have a null reference. This was already set to enable. Does this mean we don't have any potential null reference exceptions? Of course not. If we compile the solution and open the error list and look at the warnings produced by the compiler, notice that it tells us we do have a few potential problems. The nullable setting is per project, and if we were to disable it for each of the projects in the solution, all the warnings would disappear. Let's make sure that it's enabled for all the projects in our solution. Optionally, you can turn on Treat Warnings as Errors. If we do that, all of a sudden, this would produce compiler errors instead of warnings. This setting is under the Errors and Warnings in the properties of each project, but can also be configured in the CS proj file. The setting is called Treat Warnings as Errors. And when this is enabled, look at what happens if we now compile. These warnings are now errors. If you work in a large application where you transition to using nullable reference types, it may be a little bit overwhelming to treat all of these as errors, as you'd have a lot to fix. It can definitely be a good idea to enable this, especially if the code is built continuously in a build pipeline. You'd get immediate feedback about potential issues. We can remove Treat Warnings as Errors for now and go ahead and try to solve these warnings. When we enable nullable reference types, the compiler now assumes that each of the different references that we use in the application will always be set to an instance. If the compiler cannot determine that you've set that to an instance before using it, you will get a warning.